Right, let's get started. Um, Good evening, everyone. Let me just load this chat. Can you hear me now? Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Cool. Right. Um, yeah, we're going to do a little quiz to begin with, like we did last week. So I'll give you a few minutes so that anyone who wants to join can join. And we're going to refresh our new words. And it's going to be an amalgamation of all the new words that we've learned, including the ones from last year. So it's going to be a randomization of 30 out of the 50 words that we learned. So yeah, let's see how much you can remember. Cool, right. Give everyone a few more minutes. Anyone who wants to join can join. Right, I can see 13 people on the Zoom and 5 people. So if you don't want to join, that's fine. You can put your answers in the chat, but I'm going to start in a minute. So anyone that actually wants to take part, remember you can also join midway through if you can't get the code in time as well. Right, let's make a start then. Right, get ready. Right, first question then. What means a ghost or a ghost-like image? No one, no one said an apparition. You all said macabre. Macabre, you could have a macabre apparition, um, but it wouldn't be macabre itself. Okay, question number two. Something that is dull, bleak, and lifeless is. It is dreary. Well done to those of you who got it. Okay, question number three. Something that is horrifying, especially because it involves death or injury. Okay, only 2 people got macabre. So yeah, macabre is more of an adjective than it is a noun. To describe something that's horrifying. Okay, question four then. If something is strange and scary in a mysterious way, it is. Nice. Everyone knows the word eerie. Well done, guys. Okay, question five. A feeling that something bad is going to happen. Okay. We had a split over all of them but the right answer. So if something is foreboding, it tends to be that feeling that something bad is going to happen. It's not going to be reluctant because reluctant means you don't really want to do something. It's not indistinct because that means it's not something that's clear, and it's not sinister. Although I get the confusion there. Okay, question 6 then. If something is empty, lonely, and without life, it is. Remember, if you've just joined, hello to you. You can still join the game. The pin is at the bottom if you want to join our quiz. If not, you're welcome to put them in the chat if you know them. Okay, nice. So people knew that it was desolate. It's not going to be meticulous because that means if you do something very carefully and precisely, and it's not grim, although again, I get the confusion because that is something that's a bit disgusting. Okay, question 7 then. So if you get a feeling of being sad or gloomy, you might say that you have people putting the right answer in the chat. It is melancholy. Okay, question 8 then. If you're worried or nervous, you might be. Again, a few correct answers in the chat. So it is apprehensive. A lot of people went for deflated. Deflated tends to mean sad rather than worried or nervous. Okay. Question 9 then. So if you show strength to recover or keep going through hardship, you could say that you are. Again, correct answer in the chat. It is resilient. Okay. Question number 10 then. So if you're very careful and precise, you could say that you do something. Okay, it's split for this one. It is meticulous. Amiable means to be friendly. Tentative means, again, sort of like apprehensive or wary. Okay, number 11 then. If you stare angrily, what do you do? You glare. I'm glad, yes. Okay. Number 9, if you're unwilling or hesitant, you could say that you are something to do something. Nice. Getting a few right answers in the chat. It is reluctant. Oh, we got a new leader. Okay, if you're very confused, you are blank. Again, put the right answers in the chat. It is bewildered. Elated means to be really happy. Dreary means to be kind of sad. So it's our bewildered. Ooh, regained leadership. Okay, question 14 then. If you're disheartened or disappointed, you might be blank. And I've given you a clue in the picture for this one. Nice, it is deflated. Okay, refusing to change your mind or not giving in, you would be blank. Nice, be right answers in the chat. It is adamant. Aha, okay. Interesting to see a split on this one. Okay, you stay longer than expected. You blank. It is linger. Now, a few people say pulsate for this one. Pulsate is kind of when you vibrate. Think about your blood pulses around your body because your heart beats. So to pulsate is sort of a beating rhythm. Linger means to stay. Okay, question 17. If you're brave and persistent, a lot of people went for adamant and amiable for this one. Um, Slight distinctions. To be amiable is more to be friendly than it is to be brave, and adamant is more to that you don't you definitely won't do something. You're stubborn is adamant. Okay. Question 18. A tendency to believe things too easily. So if you believe in things too easily or you're gullible, you might also be called this or have this. It is credulity. So if you have credulity, it means you believe things too easy. Okay, question 19. Without interest or emotion. Nice. A lot of people got this. It's apathetic. Okay, question 20 then. Done quietly and secretly to avoid being noticed. Nice answers in the chat. Yeah, most people got this. It is to be stealthy or to do something stealthily. Okay, 21. If you have excessive confidence or boldness or to do something with audacity, such as skydiving. It is temerity. Not many people got this one. A lot of people said voracious. If you're voracious, it means that you are very hungry or you're insatiable. You're very driven to do something, whereas temerity is confidence. Okay, 22 then. Unable to move or act or otherwise are immobilized. Oh. Seen a few correct answers in the chat. Well done. It is paralyzed. One person went for the opposite. If the opposite of being paralyzed is to be animated, animated means you've got lots of movement, whereas paralyzed is unable to move. Okay, 23 then. A private or secret meeting might otherwise be called. And the picture might give you a clue if you've seen a recent film of this name. Get a few right answers in the chat. 50-50 split between blue and green. It is conclave. Countenance is someone's face. Okay, 24. Moving quickly with short steps, otherwise might be called. And you should have a clue again from the picture. It is scurrying. Okay. A rapid outburst of shots and noises is otherwise called. Correct answers in the chat again. It is a fusillade. Okay, if something is not clear or not sharply defined or it is hard to see or hear, you might say that it is blank. Ooh, a lot of people got this one. It's indistinct. Okay, 27 then. To show great care and perseverance or working diligently, you might otherwise be blank. Okay, answer in the chat again. Well done. Okay, it is assiduous. Very similar to tentative. Tentative is more when you're apprehensive or you're worried about doing something, where assiduous is where you take care and perseverance because you want to do something. The distinction there. Okay, beating or throbbing strongly. Again, I've given you a clue in the picture. Something that does this. Nice. It is pulsating. Okay, two questions to go. 29 then, if something comes a great surprise or amazement, you might feel blank. Nice. It is astonishment. Elation is to do with joy and happiness. Okay, final one. Number 30 then, having a huge appetite or being very eager. You might be described as being blank. Nice. Five, you got that correct there, and a few correct answers in the chat. Okay, let's see our leaderboard then. Well done to you who've made the top three. Let's see if you can keep that up next week. Okay. Right, on to what we're doing today. We're going to do our final sort of stop thinking about making inferences and sort of comprehension questions. So, specifically, I want today to start thinking about characters and how we can start to analyze why writers make characters the way that they do. Characters are one of the most important parts of a story. Um, if we didn't have an interesting character, we wouldn't want to read a book. It's often the characters that teach us something about the story and allow us to leave feeling like we've learned something. So they must be able to capture your imagination. Now, characterization enables writers to form stories that are not only believable, but have a purpose, that make them relatable to the reader so that you can finish the novel, finish the book, whatever, and feel like you've learned something or at least come away as a better person than you were before. So, just a quick glance to the chat. These are words that we've kind of done since the end of last year and the start of this year. So there may have been some in there that people who are new may not have known. Um, okay, what is a character then? Very basic. Let's go back to the basics. A character is a being, not necessarily human, but it's any sort of being that pushes along the plot, whether that's by what they say, what they do, what they think, or their reason for doing something. Now, they don't have to be human. They could be animals, such as in the extract we saw last week from Animal Farm. It could be an object. It could be aliens, such as in George Orwell's novel. It could be a god, or it could even be a personification of nature itself. They are all things that push along the plot. Now, not all characters have to be real, but they can be. And different types of characters could include, if it was a historical figure, a lot of Shakespeare's plays are about real people, but they're reimagined in a fictional sense. So, for example, those of you that come to my sessions about Shakespeare's Macbeth will know that Macbeth was a real person. But Shakespeare changes the story a little bit and changes his character in order to let the audience learn something from the story. And so stories might be based on real people, but most often than not, they will be changed in order to help the audience enjoy it and learn something. Sometimes you might get characters who represent real people, but aren't. So, for example, in the extract we looked at last week on Animal Farm, George Orwell wrote that book with particular people in mind, and he based the characters, the animals, off those people. So they're not real people, but they do represent people or ideas. You might get a character who's based on the author himself. So a famous example is David Copperfield. Is supposed to be Charles Dickens when he was a child working in the factory. And then more often than not, you get imaginary people such as Harry Potter or Katniss Everdeen, people who are definitely not real, but still have a purpose. So, how do we understand fictional characters then? There are no fixed rules for creating characters. It really is due to your own, what comes out of your own head and your own personal process. But every writer has their own way of doing it. As you read, try thinking like a writer. How does the author build their characters? Look at the description of that character, what they look like, what they sound like, how do they walk, how do they talk? Think about how they speak, what they say, or even their actions, so what they do. Notice how the characters react to each other. Do they affect other characters in a certain way? Do people like them? Do people not like them? How do those interactions shape our understanding of that character? So things that you could consider when you're analyzing character could be things like their background, what's happened in their past, their motivations for doing something, their personality, their voice. their physical appearance, or even their relationships to other characters. And thinking about these things helps us to understand the character more deeply. Okay, in novels, writers tend to use these things called character arcs. So all a character arc is how a character changes from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. It's sort of a think of it as a map of all the things they failed at and all the things they've succeeded at, and how those experiences help to change them as characters so that they're different to how they were at the beginning. It's kind of the same in life. If you think about yourself and the way that you were 2 years ago, I guarantee you that you are not the same person. You've learned things, whether that's from school, from life experience, things that have shaped you as a person, your personality, have changed you. And characters are the same. They have to go along a journey, otherwise they don't feel real. So examples of changes could be for a shy character becomes confident, or maybe the opposite, a bully becomes compassionate. That's big changes in character. Both follow a similar pattern where they start low, they face some challenges, they learn some things, and then they grow and they change. Okay. We also might get things called archetypes. And all I mean by an archetype is a type of character with familiar qualities, behaviors, motives. So, for example, ones that you'll have heard of will be like heroes. When I say the word hero, you all will probably have an image in mind. You'll think maybe they're brave, they're resilient, they're willing to throw themselves at problems, they save people, they're an inherently good character. You have those associations just from me saying the word hero. And so we could say that's an archetype, a person who is associated with those traits. So the opposite might be a villain. When I say villain, you might think of somebody who is evil or does things to hurt people, to cause suffering, is somebody against good. And you have those associations. Same with like a popular person or a victim. So an explorer might give you a certain idea. If you think of a joker, you might think of someone who's really funny or really likes attention. So these are all archetypes. They're associated with particular qualities. Now, archetypes have a long history in storytelling. They help us see connections between characters across different stories. So, for example, Katniss Everdeen, she's within three different novels, but her character significantly changes from the first novel to the third one. Writers sometimes use archetypes as a sort of a shortcut to understand characters. So, for example, readers recognize the type of character, and therefore we can predict what might happen in their arc. So, for example, a common one in fairy tales is the brave child escapes from an evil parent or stepmother. That's a really common archetype. Sometimes writers might play with archetypes without expectations. They might cast someone as an evil genius who actually isn't evil and turns out to be good and actually is the hero. So archetypes sort of make it easier to analyze characters and spot patterns in stories. Someone said Loki. Loki is a good example because in the Marvel films, obviously he starts out as the villain, but then obviously in the Loki series, he sort of becomes the anti-hero, the one who saves the day. And so that is an example of big change. Things like Matilda. Yeah, I agree. Matilda is another good example. She is someone that changes from beginning to end. She starts off as the sort of timid child who's kept inside to being the hero of the day who defeats Miss Trunchbull and inspires all of the other kids to revolt. So, some examples of interesting character arcs then, and stuff that you might come across. One, like we said, is the hero. So this tends to be a positive thing. It's someone who maybe starts with weaknesses, fears, flaws, and actually grows up to become stronger. So an example of this is Harry Potter. He starts off as a kid, very timid, very scared, and then ends up being the one who defeats Voldemort. Same with Frodo from The Lord of the Rings. He starts off as someone who lives a very typical life, but then gains courage by going on a journey. And so that's an arc. They begin one way and end very courageously, saving the day. You might also find a tragic arc. So Macbeth is a great example of a tragic arc. It's someone who does the opposite. Maybe they start very high, and due to their flaws and their mistakes, they actually end at quite a low point. So Macbeth is a good example because he starts off as being very valiant, being almost heroic, but due to his desire for ambition, he actually leads him to ruin. Or a more up-to-date reference might be Anakin Skywalker for those of you Star Wars fans. Someone who goes from having great promise to actually becoming Darth Vader, becoming the villain. And that's really interesting because it shows consequences. It shows us, or the people reading, or the people watching a play, that there are consequences to your actions. And that sparks discussion because we come away learning things about morality and responsibility. Another one is like a redemption arc. So it's someone who maybe starts quite flawed and changes their behavior. And a good example of that is Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. He starts off as being greedy and wanting loads of money and not helping people to actually being really generous and kind. So he redeems himself by the end of the book. Or Severus Snape, someone who starts off the book series or the film series as being quite dark and ominous character, but by the end is actually revealed as being really brave, as being sort of hero behind the cover. Then they have the coming of age arc, and this is the one we're going to look at a bit more today, the extract that we're going to look at if we have time. This is someone maybe more often than not, sort of younger, young adults, teenagers, kids, people who it focuses on a character who goes through a journey that helps them to become more morally and emotionally available. So they become more mature. So, for example, the extract we're going to look at today is called A Monster Calls, and the main character, Connor, learns to confront his grief and express his emotions. So that's him maturing and learning life lessons. Another famous example if any of you have read it, is Scout Fringe from the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. That's a character who learns about empathy and justice. Okay. And that's interesting because it gives something or character that a reader can relate to. And it can almost help us with our problems. If you're going through a tough time in life, you might read about a character who's also going through a tough time and feel inspired by it. So coming of age arcs are something interesting. And then finally, you have the anti-hero. It's another common one you might find. So the main character isn't someone who's morally perfect, but they do grow by the end. A good example is like Batman is an anti-hero. His actions are questionable. I mean, he murders people and he causes suffering and violence, but he does it for a good reason. And so he's not a full hero because he's not good, but he's not good because he does evil things, but he does them for a good reason. So that might be an anti-hero. Loki is a good example of an anti-hero. You know, if any of you have watched the Marvel series Loki, you'll know, he goes to the TVA and he is technically evil, but he ends up being the hero. He ends up doing bad things to help for the good of the people. Another examples include Katniss Everdeen, someone who's tough, independent, struggles with fear, trust, and morality, but still ends up being the hero at the end. She helps the revolution. Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye, a character who's very cynical and self-protective, but who learns the value of connection and maturity. And so it's interesting because they often discuss these sort of grey areas in morality, which reflects, I guess, character complexity of real life. So the final thing that I kind of want to go through before we look at our extract for a little bit then is this thing called given circumstances. Now, those of you who do a lot of drama will know what I mean by given circumstances, but these are just the facts that we know about the character. So it could be their actions, their thoughts, their feelings, things that they've gone through in their life. It's their background, who their parents are, what their relationship to their parents are like. Are they in another relationship? What's their home situation? These are just facts that we know. So questions to consider to learn these facts might be, where and when does the story take place? How does that affect the reader? What challenges or conflicts does that character face? Who are the other characters in their life and how do they influence them? And what is the character's social or family background? These are all facts that we can learn and work out. And it's key to understanding the why behind a character's behavior. You know, sometimes somebody's life might explain why they do certain things. And that's their given circumstances. The context of their life might explain why someone's behavior is the way it is. Someone said the coming of age is a good example. Stephen King's It. Yeah, all of the kids within that novel or the film, if you've watched it, are a good example of coming of age. They learn something by the end. They learn the value of love and being connected to your friends. Okay. And then context comes into given circumstances. Context could be historical. So context is basically given circumstances. It's the facts that we know about someone's life. So I'll quickly skip through this. So I want to do a few questions like we did last week on this extract. Now, last week we looked at Animal Farm. This week I'm going to look at a novel called A Monster Calls. If any of you have seen the film, it's a good film. But the novel was written in 2011. And it's about a boy named Connor who is visited by a monster at night who tells him three stories and therefore demands one in return. It's a really nice novel because it sort of blends fantasy with elements of reality in order to make it a very emotionally touching story. And it explores really deep themes like grief, loss, the power of truth, the power of storytelling. And it encourages discussions about emotions and imagination and resilience. And I've put a little quote, as I did last week, at the bottom. Stories are important. They can be more important than anything if they carry the truth. So I want you to sort of think about that for a second because it's a really nice quote that reflects the morals in this novel. Okay, we're going to do what we did last week. I'm going to read through a little extract, and in the chat, I want you to give me some answers. These are going to be a mixture of all the comprehension stuff that we did last week. So there will be some literal questions, there will be some inference, there will be some analytical, and for your homework, there will be some opinion questions as well. So, as I go through this, start to think about what time does Connor wake up? Who does Connor not tell about his nightmare? But also think about the inference questions. So, what does the use of the nightmare suggest about Connor's experience? And why do you think Connor insists that he is too old for monsters? So, Connor was awake when it came. He had had a nightmare, but not a nightmare, the nightmare. The one he'd been having a lot lately, the one with the darkness and the wind and the screaming. The one with the hands slipping from his grasp, no matter how hard he tried to hold on. The one that always ended with, "Go away," Connor whispered into the darkness of his bedroom, trying to push the nightmare back, not let it follow him into the world of waking. "Go away now." He glanced over at his clock his mum had put on his bedside table. 12:07. 7 minutes past midnight, which was late for a school night. Late for a Sunday, certainly. He told no one about his nightmare. Not his mum, obviously, but no one else either. Not his dad in their fortnightly or so phone call. Definitely not his grandma and no one at school. Absolutely not. What happened in the nightmare was something no one else ever needed to know. Connor blinked groggily at his room. Then he frowned. There was something he was missing. He sat up in his bed, waking a bit more. The nightmare was slipping from him, but there was something he couldn't put his finger on. Something different. Something. He listened, strained against the silence, but all he could hear was the quiet house around him, the occasional tick from the empty downstairs, or a rustle of bedding from his mum's room next door. Nothing. And then something. Something he realized was the thing that had woken him. Okay, so from this first section then, anyone have any answers for these questions? Somebody said for number one, 12:07 is correct. He woke up at 7 minutes past midnight. Now, for number two, who does Connor not tell about his nightmare? Everybody. He doesn't tell a single person. He doesn't tell his mum, he doesn't tell his dad, not his grandma, and no one at school. So no one knows about his nightmare. So let's start to pick this out with some inference questions then. What do you think? Why do you think that the writer has specifically chosen to use the nightmare. It says, well, not a nightmare, the nightmare. What do you think that suggests about Connor's experience and why? Let me know if you have any ideas in the chat because it's a choice that's been made on purpose. The focus has been placed on the nightmare. It's not a nightmare, it's a very specific nightmare. Someone says it's happened before. I would agree. I think this is a reoccurring nightmare. Someone says it's always the same one. I would agree with that. I think it implies that it's a reoccurring nightmare. It's always the same one. Um, he gets it every night, possibly. It has been a couple of times. It's a really terrifying nightmare that happens once a month, probably the same nightmare that happens before. I think all of these are right. I think something that happens constantly, and I think it's something that's very scary. So, in terms of how he experiences it, then, how do you think he feels about that nightmare? Because the question is, what does it suggest about Connor's experience? How does he feel, do you think? So he says, it is so terrifying. Yeah, it is. I think he feels absolutely petrified. He feels very afraid by this nightmare. I think he's haunted by it almost. Okay, what about number four? Why do you think Connor insists that he is too old for monsters? Maybe I've got this in the wrong place. I think I might put this for the wrong extract, for the wrong section. We'll skip number four. I think I put this for the wrong section. My bad. We'll skip on to number five. What can we infer about Connor's relationship with his family? It says um, that he didn't tell anybody about his nightmare. What maybe does that tell us? Can we infer about his relationship with his family and his friends if he's not told anybody? He's ashamed, possibly, because they are fake, possibly. Nobody believes in him, yes, possibly. Connor is still quite young. He still goes to school, and he's reinforced by the fact that he does not tell anyone at school. He's too scared and embarrassed. He doesn't trust anybody. They don't care. It's embarrassing. He seems to distance himself. He isn't close. I think all of these are correct. Clearly, and I'm glad you're all picking up on the fact that clearly this is not a positive relationship. If there was a positive relationship, there would be trust. So well done for everybody picking up that this is a negative relationship, or at least he has negative relationships with these people. So I said he feels unable to share his fears. He's possibly feeling isolated. He doesn't want to burden anyone, or it could possibly be that his family makes him feel like he has a low self-esteem. Now, I highlighted the fact that his father left. If we go back to this extract, and I'm surprised no one picked up on this, it says not his dad in their fortnightly or so phone call. Now, that possibly tells me that his dad is not around anymore. And so I can infer that his dad possibly left. Um, so I would infer that this might give him low self-esteem, possibly feeling rejected. So I think all of those are good answers. He might be embarrassed, he might be scared, definitely some sort of negative relationship. Okay, next section then. Think about these questions. So what sound wakes Connor up after the nightmare? Whose voice does Connor think it might be? Um, how does Connor try to explain away the voice before admitting it must be real? And what does this suggest about his state of mind? So, someone was calling his name, Connor. He felt a rush of panic, his guts twisting. Had it followed him? Had it somehow stepped out of the nightmare? And don't be stupid, he told himself. You're too old for monsters. And he was. He turned 13 just last month. Monsters were for babies. Monsters were for bedwetters. Monsters were for Connor. There it was again. Connor swallowed. It had been an unusually warm October and his window was still open. Maybe the curtains shushing each other in the small breeze could have sounded like Connor. All right, it wasn't the wind. It was definitely a voice, but not one he recognized. It wasn't his mother's, that was for sure. It wasn't a woman's voice at all, and he wondered for a crazy moment if his dad had somehow made a surprise trip from America and arrived too late to phone and Connor. No, not his dad. This voice had a quality to it, a monstrous quality, wild and untamed. Then he heard a heavy creak of wood outside, as if something gigantic was stepping across the timber floor. He didn't want to go and look, but at the same time, a part of him wanted to look more than anything. Wide awake now, he pushed back the covers, got out of bed, and went over to the window. In the pale half light of the moon, he could clearly see the church tower up on the small hill behind his house, the one with the train tracks curving beside it. Two hard steel lines glowing dully in the night. The moon shone, too, on the graveyard attached to the church, filled with tombstones you could hardly read anymore. Okay, let's see what people have put in the chat. So firstly, um, somebody said, someone calling him. What sounds wake Connor up? Yes, it is someone calling him. Now, whose voice did he think it might be? Someone correctly said his dad's is correct. So someone was calling him, we know from this up here, and he says down here, it wasn't a woman's voice at all. And he wondered for a crazy moment if his dad had somehow made a surprise trip from America and arrived too late to the phone. So 6 and 7 are his name being called, and he wonders if it could be his dad making a surprise visit from America. Okay, so let's think about these inference questions then. How does Connor try to explain away the voice before admitting it must be real? And why do you think he does that? Think about the curtains. He says it had been an unusually warm October and his windows were still open. Maybe the curtains shushing each other in the small breeze could have sounded like Connor. So someone said because he does not know for sure. Possibly. What about how he's feeling? What about him as a person, as a character? Because that's what today's lesson is about. It's about how do we understand the personality of a character? What personality traits might he have if he's shushing? Sorry, if he thinks it's the curtains. Why do you think he's trying to escape the noise? Someone says he's not 100% sure. Yes, I think someone says it right here. So he doesn't seem scared and afraid. I think that is the correct answer. I think it's a technique where he's trying to build confidence in himself. I think he's trying to convince himself that he's not scared. So that's what I would put for number 8. What does it suggest about his state of mind? That he is too old for monsters and they must be the curtains. Why do you think he says he's too old for monsters? I think that potentially could relate to his family life, and I think it tells us something about him as a child. Now, as a child, you tend to be quite immature because you don't know much about life. But would you agree here that I think there is a certain maturity about this character? The fact that he's trying to convince himself that the curtains are the one making things making the noise, and he's saying he's too old for monsters. I think that tells me, at least, that he's almost too old for his age, and I think he's trying to overcompensate. Um, Almost kind of linking back to his family life. We said, or loads of you said, that clearly there's a negative relationship. Imagine not having a father that's left, or a mother that doesn't look after you properly. You probably would end up raising yourself and raising your own maturity and independence quite early on. Someone said, I think that he's depressed. That could possibly be correct. Um, Very confused and scared, trying to convince himself that he's overthinking. Yes. So yeah, I think on a deeper level, for number 8, he's trying to rationalize what he hears by telling himself it could be through the curtains, and I think that's because, again, he's trying to bolster his own maturity. And what does this suggest about his state of mind? He's clearly anxious, but in denial somewhat. He's trying to find a logical explanation instead of admitting that something is happening. And I personally think that reveals quite a lot about his personality. He's clearly a child that's too old for his age. He's trying to build independence, possibly because of a bad home life. And I think this reveals his internal struggles. his inability to control his own fear. Okay, right. Let's carry on. Now, one question for this section. Um, why do you think the mother gave a funny look at the tree? What does this tell us about her? So it says Connor could also see the great yew tree that rose from the center of the graveyard, a tree so ancient it almost seemed to be made of the same stone as the church. He only knew it was yew because his mother had told him. First, when he was little, to make sure he didn't eat the berries, which are poisonous, and again this past year when she started staring out of the kitchen window with a funny look on her face and saying, "That's a yew tree, you know." And then he heard his name again, Connor, like it was being whispered in both his ears. What, Connor said, his heart thumping, suddenly impatient for whatever was going to happen. A cloud moved in front of the moon, covering the whole landscape in darkness, and whoosh of wind rushed down the hill and into his room, billowing the curtains. He heard the creaking and cracking of wood again, groaning like a living thing, like a hungry stomach of the world growling for a meal. Then the cloud passed and the moon shone again on the yew tree, which was now stood firmly in the middle of his back garden, and here was the monster. Now, let's focus on the mum. Why do you think she gave a funny look? Why did she have a funny look on her face when she was looking at the yew tree? Is there anything that's said here that might give you a clue if you're thinking a bit deeper about this? Yes, on a literal level, when he was a kid, she made sure that he didn't eat the berries so that she could protect Connor. But why is she doing it now, do you think? She's staring out of the window. Think about that. What might that tell us about her character? She sees ghosts. Maybe, but not on a literal level. Maybe she sees metaphorical ghosts. Maybe she's haunted by the past. Um, um, she might see something unusual or might be mentally ill. I think you're correct. I think there is a sort of illness there, some mental illness, possibly due to age, possibly due to just bad mental health in general. She could be schizophrenic, possibly. I think there is some sort of illness there. Nostalgia, that is a possible answer. I would veer away from nostalgia. I don't think it's necessarily a positive thing. To me, there is connotations of something negative here. I think because she's staring out of the window. You know, she's not looking out of the window, she's staring. And I think that to me conveys negative emotions. And just look at her dialogue, what she specifically says. The fact that she says, you know, that to me suggests that maybe she's almost forgotten that she's mentioned it before, possibly linking to some sort of dementia or certainly mental illness. Mentally unstable, seeing an entity, disturbed by the past. I think disturbed by the past absolutely could be an option. I think whatever it is, it's something negative. So I think the writer hints at a special connection between her and a tree. She The fact that she mentions the poisonous berries implies that it might have something to do with an illness of some sort, and she possibly has deteriorating mental health. So I think whatever you said, it should be something negative, because I think the fact that she stares and says, "you know," gives me clues about what's happened. Okay, right. We'll start on this, but then we'll sort of end. We might just do. You know what? No, let's not do these ones. Um, I want to do sort of 13. I want to focus on 13 just before we end, actually. I won't read this extract out, but I will tell you. Um, Actually, let's sum up what's happened. So the tree begins to twist here, and it kind of makes itself into a monster. And the monster's really tall, and it lowers its head towards Connor. And it speaks. It says, Connor O'Malley, it said, a huge gust of warm, composting smelling breath rushing through Connor's window, blowing his hair back. Its voice rumbled low and loud with a vibration so deep could feel it in his chest. I have come to get you, the monster said. And I'm going to leave it there. Let's answer number 13. Thinking about this idea of an archetype, someone, a character type that we associate with certain things. Does anyone have any ideas what kind of character, a well-known type of character the monster might be playing here? Just looking at that little bit, it says, I've come to get you. I think there's a couple of interpretations that we could have here. Personally, I would, someone says Connor's the chosen one, possibly. I personally would think the role of a guide. I think it kind of comes down as almost forcing Connor to tell the truth, almost a bit like a mentor. Okay. Right. Sorry that I'm sort of pushing along. I didn't get to do those last few questions I wanted to. But I need to move on to GCSE in a few minutes. So those of you that have been sending me homework, thank you very much. I have marked a little bit of it, not all of it, so I do apologize. I'm going to get onto that this week because I've got some free time. Um, so this is the homework for Key Stage 3 this week. Anyone who wants to send me something, please do. The email that we now have for English is up here. So if you want to email anything, any homework, any questions, this will come directly to me. So don't send it to the WhatsApp, send it to this email. And I'll leave these questions on just for 30 seconds, or this is recorded if you want to go back. But have a think of some of these questions. I'm going to give you the rest of this extract to have a look at. So this is the rest of the extract. And if you want to answer those questions about, is here. Thank you to those who have been sending me in homework. It's nice to see. So our email is at the bottom here. It's english@steptosuccess.co.uk. Anyone who wants to send me the homework, it will come directly to me. Okay, right. Whilst I sort of leave this on just for 20 more seconds, I'll answer the chat before we move on to GCSE. So GCSE English is literally in 30 seconds. I'm going to finish off Macbeth. I've got 2 more sessions of Macbeth, and then we'll do some inspect course. Right. Thank you to everyone for coming today. If you've been for the GCSE stuff, I'm going to move on to Macbeth. Okay. Right. Right, anyone who wants to stay to Macbeth is absolutely welcome. Have I received your Macbeth essay? I have. I just haven't got around to marking everything that I've been sent because I've just been really busy. But I've got some free time this week, so I will get on to marking, I promise you, and everything will get sent back to you this week. Um, okay, right, let's get on to doing Macbeth because I want to finish this. Now, Act 4, then. I want to get straight into this because I really just want to get this done. Welcome to everyone who's joining for this session. Can I give you a rough grade? Yes, I will give you a rough grade when I mark it. So, Macbeth is only in one scene in Act 4, and it is Act 4, Scene 1. When we left Macbeth last session, he was going to see the witches. So this is the moment directly after where he goes back to the witches. Now Macbeth consults the witches again and receives 3 apparitions: an armed head, a bloody child, and a crowned child holding a tree. Now, he misinterprets these as assurances of how invincible he is. However, upon learning that Macduff has fled to England, he orders the massacre of Macduff's family, showing his descent into cruelty. So, let's get straight into this. This is still the climax of the play. This scene is so valuable as to what happens in the rest of the play. So, this begins. We see Macbeth's change. This first quote is when he first goes into the witches. Now, this is not something you have to remember. I just picked this general speech out to make a point. When he first goes to see the witches, notice he uses very imperative terms. He says, "Answer me." Um, he commands them. He says, "I conjure you, answer me." Um, he uses very forceful imperatives. He repeats these sort of repeated pronouns and imperatives, showing that, think back to Act 1, he was a like measly little character. He's now got so much confidence. He's so bold in the way that he acts that he literally walks into a cave of darkness with his witches and he orders them, he overpowers them. And that shows how much he's changed from Act 1. He actively commands them to be there, showing how dependent he is on the supernatural. I mean, even just his desperation, the fact he's like commanding them shows us how much this means to him, how consumed he is by paranoia. He shows no fear of unleashing chaos. He's literally willing to let churches be destroyed, crops ruined, castles collapse, and even the natural order disintegrate. As long as he gets what he wants, this highlights how far he has fallen from the noble warrior in Act 1. So I really picked this quote out because I wanted to show you how much he's changed. Because I think this is a great quote to show you how much he's changed. I mean, he literally says that trees can be blown down, castles can fall, the pyramids can break apart. And he says, that's all okay. I'm fine letting chaos rule the world as long as you tell me what I need to know. And so he's bold. So if we start to pick this quote apart a little bit more, we see his insistence. In terms of context, this quote shows us that he is the classic tragic hero. I mean, he is consumed by pride, by hubris. The fact that he's demanding things from evil spirits shows us how mad he is, how far he's fallen from this warrior, this valiant, heroic guy. And he's now in league with evil. It's a massive change. Contextually, it's also a direct reference to James I's journey. Those of you who remember back to our context recap, you remember me talking about James's boat journey to pick up his new bride. This is directly referenced in this quote. So through the yeasty waves, confound and swallow navigation up. What he's saying there is you can sink as many ships as you like, as long as you tell me what I need to know. And so this directly echoes James's almost sunken ship. You get this sort of imagery of nature as well, representing the divine order. It's showing how his actions have already corrupted the world so much that he's happy to just unleash further chaos. He's happy to just rip the world apart as long as he gets to know what he wants to know. So it shows us how much he's defied God and how much he's fallen into chaos and madness. And then you get this fate versus free will again. Macbeth is trying to control fate, but his reliance on the witches ensures that he is therefore entrapped by it. So you get this debate of fate versus free will again, but I don't want to focus too much on this quote. Now, I do want to highlight the very blatant irony of the fact. Now, Macbeth goes to the witches to seek assurance. He wants them to basically confirm what he already thinks. But in doing so, he ironically triggers his own downfall. He goes to the witches for them to say, everything's fine, you're going to be fine, life's fine. But what actually happens is the opposite. He triggers his own downfall. He triggers his own death later down the line by misinterpreting these prophecies. So this whole scene is a bunch of dramatic irony, because in trying to control his own fate, he seals his own death, which is incredibly ironic. Now, this scene does solidify him as a tragic hero. I know we had Act 3, Scene 4 last time, we saw his peripeteia, but this really is him as a tragic hero. His pride, his flaw of ambition, causes him to misinterpret the apparitions that we're about to explore, showing how he's so blind to the truth that he will literally tell himself anything to get through the day. So much so that it leads towards his own death. So let's go into the apparitions then. So the first thing that the witches conjure is an armed head. And that head says, beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. The point of this apparition, I've left a little picture there, is the apparition escalates Macbeth's tyranny. Um, it warns him to be careful of Macduff. So let's pick that apart a little bit. I mean, the armed head is a symbol. It symbolizes violence. I mean, the head is decapitated. He sees a floating decapitated head. And that visually symbolizes not only war, but violence, beheading. It represents Macbeth's militarized and paranoid mindset. The world is so dominated by conflict and fear. And it foreshadows his own death in Act 5 when he gets his head cut off. And so Macbeth misinterprets this as almost he feels secure when he shouldn't. We get the sort of repeated imperatives as beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife. So it creates a kind of commanding tone that appeals to Macbeth's anxieties. And this highlights not only the witch's manipulation, but the fact that they give him truth. They don't give him the whole picture, they just kind of give him little bits of truth. And it lures him into this false sense of confidence. Because he's now thinking, oh, okay, well, if I kill Macduff, I'm going to be absolutely fine. Whereas we know that's not the truth at all. And then again, the dramatic irony is the audience knows the prophecy will come true, literally, but Macbeth interprets it as a challenge to be eliminated. So you've got that irony there. Okay, so that was the first apparition, an armed floating head. Um, Now this could be interpreted multiple ways. It could be a projection of Macbeth's own thoughts. I mean, think back to the dagger and the ghost of Banquo. It could be the same thing. It could just be a manifestation of his own internal guilt. But I wouldn't take that necessarily as an interpretation because it doesn't offer new knowledge. It simply just confirms the existence of the suspicion of Macduff. So yeah, it could be in his head. But either way, it tells him to beware Macduff. Now, the second apparition is that of a bloody child. And it says to Macbeth, be bloody, bold, and resolute. Laugh to scorn. The power of man for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. So, this apparition, what it does is it gives Macbeth a false sense of security because it tells him that as long as no one is born of woman, no one can kill him. And so he goes away and he thinks, well, no one can murder me then because everyone is born from a woman. So he then thinks that he's invincible. However, we know through dramatic irony, and I won't spoil it for any of you that don't know yet, but Macduff was not born of woman in the literal sense. So he misinterprets this prophecy and thinks he's invincible because he thinks no one can kill me because everyone's born of woman. So thinking about picking this apart then, the bloody child is also a symbol, symbolizing not only violence but the destruction of innocence. I mean, it's a killing of a child. The idea of blood keeps recurring throughout the play. We've seen it linked to this idea of guilt and slaughter. But it also foreshadows Macduff's unique birth. Apologies, I've already spoiled it, but Macduff was delivered by a cesarean section. And so this bloody child works on two levels. It is a literal warning about Macduff's birth, but also a metaphorical sign of the bloodshed Macbeth will cause by interpreting it. And so he misinterprets it because he thinks, well, I'm invincible, no one can kill me, but he doesn't know that Macduff is actually born by cesarean section, and so, yeah, Macduff could kill him and does. You also get this triplet here. So you get the bloody, bold, and resolute. You get the three adjectives that are somewhat alliterative. So you get the bloody and bold. That's sort of alliterative B sound, which we call plosive. So it's a sort of plosive B-heavy triplet. And it encourages Macbeth's violent confidence. Because we've talked about in the past, if you use like a plosive sound, like a B or a D or a V, they're quite hard-hitting sounds. They're used because they mimic violence. And so they used to sort of create a forceful tone. And in this sense, it works on Macbeth because it urges him to go into a deeper sense of brutality. And so that second apparition almost convinces him to be more violent by using that plosive triplet. And then we also get this none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. That statement in itself is a paradox because it sounds like absolute safety. It sounds like Macbeth is invincible and no one can murder him. But we know that the witches speak in riddles. It's what they say is only part of the truth. And so there's irony there because Macbeth doesn't even question if there's an alternative possibility. He just believes it without even like thinking about it, without even thinking about the consequences. And so that shows us how deep he is and how overwhelmed he is in ambition and violence that he doesn't even stop to think about if there's other possibilities. He just believes it. Okay, let me just quickly answer the chat. Is there a movie for Macbeth? There is, but I'm not sure if it's on any sort of streaming platforms. I'd have to get back to you on that. There's a really good 2015 adaptation of Macbeth. Would reading Macbeth help? I mean, if you're studying Macbeth, I would say yes. And what is paranoia? So paranoia is when you're really scared about something to the point it like takes over your life, where you'll be just going about your normal day and you'll be sort of scared of something happening. Okay, and then the third apparition then. So he sees a floating head, he's a bloody child, and then he sees a child holding a tree wearing a crown, who says to him, Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. So very much like the bloody child, this apparition kind of again highlights his inability to think about things. He's blinded by his own ambition. He never stops to think if there's another possibility. He fails to see the symbolism attached to this child. So let's do the same. Let's pick this apart. Thinking about a crowned child, then, what might that symbolize? Well, it symbolizes Malcolm, which is Duncan's son. Remember back to Act 2? The old King Duncan was murdered by Macbeth. Well, Malcolm is his son, and he is the rightful heir to the throne. So, having a crowned child is symbolic of the fact that order will be restored because Malcolm will become king again. It's foreshadowing that. And so, the crown on the child's head represents a legitimate kingship, contrasting to Macbeth's rule, in which he very much stole. Macbeth fails to acknowledge this and assumes it refers to Banquo's son, showing that he's flawed in his thinking. I mean, thinking back to Act 3, we know that he's very scared that Fleance escaped. And his first thought when he sees the child wearing a crown is, oh, that's Fleance, the child, and now I've got to kill Fleance. Whereas he doesn't even stop to think. Duncan had a son who's literally the heir to the throne. So that doesn't highlight how overcome he is by ambition and how blind he is, then I don't know what does. So rather than reflect on the crown or the child as a reminder of succession and innocence, he only sees reassurance of power. He sees what he wants to see, which is confirmation that he will remain king. He's blinded by the truth. Okay. And then again, we get this paradox. The child tells him that Macbeth will only be defeated if a forest literally moves, which obviously we know to be literally incorrect. A forest can't literally move. But again, like the bloody child, Macbeth doesn't really think of out of the box ideas. Um, this paradox seems impossible, but like the bloody head or the bloody head of a child, it tells only part of the truth. This gives Macbeth a false sense of invulnerability, showing how his downfall lies in his overconfidence and misinterpretation. The forest foreshadows the restoration of the natural order and the fact that the soldiers cut the branches to disguise themselves in Act 5. So as you'll come to see in Act 5, very much like Macduff being born of cesarean section, the trees do actually move, not by themselves, but because they're cut down and used as a disguise by the army. And so, again, this is Macbeth not seeing outside the box. He's being blinded by ambition, not looking for other possibilities. And so he misinterprets all of the apparitions, thinking that he's safe. And so, therefore, he feels confident. So, think about the context then. This all links to the great chain of being. The child and the moving forest symbolizes the natural world avenging itself, and the idea um, that there will be a return of natural order. This foreshadows Macbeth's downfall and the return of cosmic balance. And it would have emphasized the moral message of the play to the audience, who would have been scared to sin, as they believed sinning would always lead to eternal damnation. You cannot win against God and order. So, the fact that the witches are saying or prophesizing that the forest is going to move is almost like foreshadowing that the forest is going to take back over. If you think back to the Great Chain of Being, Macbeth broke this by killing Duncan, by killing Banquo. The world is trying to restore order to itself, and we know that it comes about because of the moving of trees. But how does Macbeth respond to all of this? He says that will never be. Who can impress the forest, bid the tree and fix his earthbound roots? Tell me, if your art can tell so much, shall Banquo's issue ever reign in this kingdom? He's arrogant. He's saying that will never be. The forest can't move, and I know that. So I'm invincible. No one can kill me. He falsely interprets the apparition. He sees only the literal interpretation, which gives him false security, false confidence. Now, notice also the end. He said, shall Banquo's issue ever reign? He's just been given these apparitions, but all he can think about is Banquo. It clearly shows that he's still got some lingering doubts from Act 3 about Fleonce's escape. Okay, and the final thing that the witches show him is a line of kings. So, out of the cauldron comes a line of kings, all that look somewhat like Banquo. And Macbeth says, what? Will the line stretch out to the crack of doom? And yet the eighth appears who bears a glass, which shows me many more. And some I see that twofold bowls and treble scepters carry. So he's looking at a procession of eight kings, all walking, um, who supposedly represent Banquo's heirs. So these apparitions heighten Macbeth's fear because he's already scared about Fleance escaping. And so now he's thinking, oh my God, Fleance is going to become king, and then he's going to have kids, and all of his kids will become king. And so he's becoming frustrated because it's saying to him that his efforts to secure the throne by killing Duncan and killing Banquo are all going to be for nothing. So let's analyze this a little bit further. What will the line stretch out to the crack of doom? Now, for those of you who don't know, the crack of doom is a reference to the Judgment Day in the Bible. And so we call this allusion. What Shakespeare is doing is alluding to something in the Bible, specifically Judgment Day. So the fact that this is quite an exaggerated link emphasizes the almost the endless nature of Banquo's line, as well as Macbeth's horror at the legacy being erased. It conveys his frustration and how his violent efforts have been for nothing. Because what he's feeling, he's seeing these eight kings in front of him, and he's seeing his entire reign fall away because he's thinking, well, I'm going to die now, or at least my sons won't become king. And so his response to that is horror and shock. And so he uses this very exaggerated link to the Bible to make a point, to almost say to himself, like, oh my gosh, like, this is so terrible that it's like the world is ending. He also has this rhetorical question. It underlies Macbeth's growing sense of helplessness against fate. He's in despair about seeing Banquo's lineage. He's shocked. Like, will this line never stop? You also get the idea of the glass. One of the kings is holding a mirror. That's what a glass is, and it's reflecting loads of other kings in the mirror. So there's eight actual kings standing there, but in the mirror you can see many more. And so the glass kind of refers to a mirror, which symbolizes, I guess, Macbeth's need for self-reflection, as well as Banquo's extending line. The mirror multiplies the image of the kings, suggesting infinite succession, which therefore scares Macbeth further because he's already seeing eight, which terrifies him enough, and now he's thinking, "Oh my God, Banquo's end is never gonna end, and so I'm never gonna get to be king again. My family's never gonna be king again. Oh my!" And so he's scared. You also get the twofold bowls and treble scepters, or scepters rather. So you get this sort of image of power here. Shakespeare again alludes to the regalia of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Now, this is a contextual reference. Um, James the First, as we know, was Scottish, had a little bit of Irish in him, and he also became the King of England. So the treble scepters is reference to him, to James the First being the king of three countries. And so this image glorifies James and torments Macbeth, emphasizing Banquo's long rule. You also get this alliteration as well, the twofold and the treble, almost creating this kind of ceremonial rhythm that mimics the grandness of the royal succession of the kings in front of him. It adds emphasis to make the vision more overwhelming for Macbeth. So, contextually, it links to King James the First. Okay, and then thinking about context then. Firstly, the crack of doom is a direct biblical reference. And so you get this sort of allusion to the Bible. It references Judgment Day, where Christians believe that God is going to restore order. And so this endless line of kings shows that Banquo's descendants' rule is part of God's divine plan, fitting into the great chain of being, where monarchs are appointed by God. So Macbeth, very much by contrast, has broken the divine order. And if you don't know that by now, where have you been? Macbeth has heavily broken the great chain of being by murdering Duncan, by murdering Banquo, by plotting to murder Fleance. So this vision underlines he cannot rewrite his fate or God's will, no matter how many murders he commits. Because the crack of doom is like his exaggerated way of saying that Banquo's rule is never ending. So he feels helpless. You also This also solidifies him as a tragic hero. I know Act 3, Scene 4, we had his peripeteia, the moment of no return. But this scene really reveals the consequences of that peripeteia. He's feeling so futile, so helpless. All because of his tragic flaw of ambition. Despite all of his efforts, he cannot secure the throne. His sons will never be the kings of England. And so his despair and horror from this shows that he's recognizing his own futility of resisting fate. This moment heightens tragic irony. Macbeth has sacrificed his soul, his morality, and his peace of mind all for nothing. We saw in Act 2 how guilty he felt. It's all for nothing now because he's never going to be king. And then finally, again, we get this contextual reference to King James I. So Shakespeare is reminding the audience of James I's acclaimed link to Banquo. Shakespeare's decision to present Banquo as noble, in opposition from the original story and the Holinshed Chronicles, marks Macbeth as being directly contrasting to Banquo, therefore presenting him as more of a tyrant. Okay. Someone said, will we get a copy of this lesson after 9? All of these lessons are recorded. They're on YouTube, and they also are recorded for you. So yes, you will. And if you can't find it, it will be on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and rewatch. Because I know I go through a lot in these sessions, and I would understand it if nobody picks anything up because I talk so much. But I just want to get through. I'm giving you detailed content. When it comes to your exams, it'll be so useful, trust me, because these are the things you're getting marked on. So, to end this scene then, Macduff flees to England. And we know that because Lennox tells him that bring you word Macduff is fled to England. Self-explanatory quote. Now, I've put this in here because this is really key, not only to the plot, but to the tension and the suspense of the plot. Because Macduff is marked as Macbeth's rival. This moment marks Macduff as the person who's going to try and stop Macbeth. He raises an army against him. And so this heightens the tragedy of the play. Because the power balance is shifting. Macduff is going to be Macbeth's opposition and rival. So the final quote for this scene then, before we move on to the next, is Time, thou anticipatest my dread exploits. From this moment, the very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand. What he means by that is time. You stand in the way of my plans. From this moment, I'm going to act as soon as I want to do something. So, first thing to pick out is this apostrophe. He speaks directly to time, as if time were a person. He's personifying a thing that isn't human. And he almost presents it as an enemy, like time is an enemy. He's saying, like, you're getting in my way. Speaking to it almost reveals his paranoia. Like he feels fate and time are conspiring against him. And this personification of time makes Macbeth's struggle seem, I guess, cosmic, as if the universe itself is resisting his ambition. So that shows us a lot about Macbeth. He's very paranoid, but he's also still driven by ambition. He's literally speaking to time. You also get this repetition of the firstlings. What he means by firstlings is like his desire to act, so his impulses. So he's saying like, what my heart wants me to do is what my hand is going to do. So whatever I want to do is what I'm going to do. And so the repetition of this idea of the firstlings conveys his obsession with violence. It shows his impulse and his determination. He's no longer going to hesitate. He's going to act straight away. Think back to Act 2, Scene 1, with how much he deliberated before he killed Duncan. He felt so guilty that he couldn't bring himself to do it. So the fact that right now he's saying, I'm going to do something with something without thinking, shows how far he's descended into violence. And then you also get this repetition of the metaphor of the hand and the heart, where the heart here represents his thoughts, his desires, his emotions, and the hand represents his actions. And so, Macbeth is collapsing the space between thought and conscience. He's saying, whatever I want to do, I'm going to do. So again, it shows how much he's changed. So, just to highlight to you, if you hadn't picked up already, this quote shows how far Macbeth has descended into reckless violence. And I've highlighted two things here. Because AO2 isn't just about language, it's also about structure. I know we focus a lot on language, but structure is a big part of it. So I highlighted the difference between Act 2, Scene 1. I mean, he hesitated before killing Duncan because he felt guilty about it. He knew it was wrong. Whereas here, he's saying, I'm not going to think anymore. I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm just going to do something. And so that's a big change for him as a character. But also the heart and the hands. This heavily contrasts to Act 1, Scene 4. He gave the wink at the hand, the eye wink at the hand speech, where he showed how his thoughts and his actions were separate. Whereas now he's very much saying they're the same thing. And so both of these links, these structural callbacks, show us how far he's changed, or how much he's changed, rather. Okay. So his response then is this. The castle of Macduff I will surprise, seize upon Fife, give to the edge of the sword, his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. And what he's saying there is, I'm going to launch a surprise attack against Macduff's castle. I'm going to seize the town that he lives in. I'm going to kill his wife. I'm going to kill his children and anyone unfortunate enough to get into my way and be somewhat related to him. She's going to kill every single person who's related to Macduff, which is quite an extreme response to the situation. So I'm going to kind of briefly kind of go over this because there's another scene I want to do. But notice here, you've got, again, the sort of fricative verbs, the surprise, the seize, the give. You've got the very fricative sounding in verbs, which underscores his brutality, the fact that he's literally going to kill innocent people. He's feeling very forceful in the tone that he's using here. It really emphasizes how corrupt he is as a person. He's harming innocent people. I mean, even just look here. He's killing the wife and the kids of Macduff. That is insane. Like, it shows how far he is into corruption. That he's literally killing children now. So he's really come a long way in terms of how much he's been overcome by violence. And then also you get this euphemism. Like he could say, I'm going to kill them. But he doesn't say kill. He doesn't say murder. He says he's going to give them the swords. So that euphemism there is almost him avoiding saying murder or death. And he's almost presenting it in a way that he's sacrificing these people to the gods, to the swords, which highlights how overcome and controlled by violence it is. It's like he's been possessed. Okay, right. You also get this unfortunate souls as well. Like everyone who isn't related to Macduff is just collateral damage. It's just nothing, no one. He dehumanizes all of his victims. He depersonalizes the act of murder. You know, the focus of the sentence is given to the sword, not the people. He says he's going to give them to the swords. And then he calls people unfortunate souls. So he like references the sword, but not the people. He's so overcome and mad. And then you also get this dramatic irony. He says that everyone related to Macduff he's going to kill. But by trying to destroy Macduff's line, he mirrors his own fear of Banquo's ruling. You know, the audience knows this act won't prevent the prophecy that the witches gave, but instead seal his doom. So there's that irony again that as much as he tries to control his own fate, he'll always be solidified into a certain path. And so finally, you get, again, context. Linking to the tragic genre, Macbeth, if you're not clear by now, is an absolute solidified tragic hero. His fatal flaw, or his hamartia, has driven him into senseless cruelty. I mean, he's killing kids, for God's sake. You know, in the earlier murders, they were wrong, but at least he had a reason for doing them. You know, they gave him a political purpose. Killing Duncan was so that he could be king. Killing Banquo was so that he could stay hidden and not detected. Whereas now he's just killing innocent people. So the audience sees his fall from his valor's minion in Act 1 to now becoming a heartless tyrant. He's fulfilling his tragic arc. And then you also get the great chain of being. You know, killing women and children is not just murder, it's very much a violation of the natural order, which is a complete break from God's law, making him a damned figure in the audience's eyes. Okay. So why is it important that we see his moral decline? Why is this scene actually important? Well, we lose sympathy for him. Up until this point, we obviously didn't really like him as a character because he was murdering people. But we kind of felt bad for him because we knew how guilty he was and how much he suffered. Whereas now he's just killing innocent people, so we don't really feel bad for him anymore. He's crossed a line. And so it's almost preparing us to want order in the next act. So what do we learn about Macbeth? Well, he's increasingly dependent on the supernatural. He's reckless. He's overconfident because he misinterprets the apparitions. He acts without hesitation. And most importantly, he has lost all moral restraint. He is not a good guy. Okay. So, very quickly then, I'm going to get through as much of this as is possible. Um, Act 4, Scene 3. Now, Macbeth isn't actually in this scene, but it's about Macbeth. We flip back to England, where Macduff is currently hiding, and Macduff and Malcolm discuss their plans to overthrow Macbeth. Now, Malcolm says, new widows howl, new orphans cry, new sorrows strike heaven on the face. I think our country sinks beneath the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds. Now, he is talking about Scotland here. He's talking about the current state of Scotland. And he's personified Scotland. Now, notice here you get this repetition. Here's the new widows, the new orphans, the new sorrows. He's almost presenting this idea of grief as being relentless, that suffering is so bad in Scotland under Macbeth's rule that it emphasizes how violent he is as a king. He's presenting how bad things are in Scotland. You also get the idea of the widows and the orphans. These are people who are the most vulnerable in society. They represent, vulnerable people. And so their suffering almost like highlights Macbeth's lack of morality because he's willing to just kill these innocent, vulnerable people. The fact that he kind of compares a widow to being quite animalistic, he reduces human grief to something primal and raw, like a wolf's cry, showing how Macbeth's reign has dehumanized Scotland. The people are no longer people; they're just animals in Macbeth's eyes. The people stripped of their dignity. The idea that grief and heaven are both personified, that grief physically hits heaven across the face. Grief is so powerful that it seems to assault heaven, to suggest that Scotland's suffering has almost cosmic consequences. Macbeth's crimes are not just political, they're spiritual sins. And then you get this sort of alliterative sibilant sorrow strikes. So the repeating S sounds create a sort of sibilant sound that reinforces the brutality and the immediacy of the suffering. So what this quote shows is how bad the state of Scotland is, that everyone is suffering because of Macbeth's violent rule. He's not a good king. Now, you also get this extended metaphor. He says it sinks between the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wound. He almost links Scotland to being a slave. He says Scotland is a prisoner, is being shackled under Macbeth's tyranny. He's being held by Macbeth. He's a prisoner to Macbeth. And this, for an audience, would evoke pity. It makes the audience sympathize with the people of Scotland. We feel bad for them because Macbeth is treating them so badly. And so it adds to this idea that we don't really like Macbeth anymore. We don't feel sympathy for him because he's just killing innocent people. He's making people's lives hell. We get this triplet. It weeps, it bleeds, a new gash is added. It helps to build intensity, creating a very uncomfortable atmosphere to really emphasize the suffering these people feel, to emphasize the consequences of Macbeth's violence on the public, the sheer weight of distress that he's causing to his very own public. And therefore, as an audience, we feel horror and pity. And then we get this violent imagery, the gash, the wounds, almost being presented like Macbeth is like beating Scotland if it was a person. He's injuring Scotland. So much so that the wounds can't even heal because Macbeth is just going to reopen the wounds. He's not letting anybody live a peaceful life. So it really emphasizes how tyrannous Macbeth is. Now, linking into context, again, we get the Great Chain of Being. Should be pretty straightforward by now. The natural order is being shattered. But then we also, and I really want to highlight this, we get a direct reference to the Bible. Malcolm echoes James chapter 1, verse 27 from the Bible, which says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Now, Shakespeare used this on purpose because it clearly is opposite to what Macbeth is doing. He's killing widows. He's making orphans cry. And so he's completely going against the teachings of the Bible. And so it shows us how much suffering Macbeth is causing. It shows us how godless he is, that he's not Christian anymore. He's aligning with evil by not um, following the Bible's rules. Okay. Now, Macduff's response to this is not in the legions of horrid hell can come a devil more damned and evil to top Macbeth. And what he means by this is there is not a single demon in hell that is more evil or worse than Macbeth. So, thinking about picking it apart, we got this hyperbolic metaphor, this exaggerated metaphor. Macduff exaggerates how monstrous Macbeth is, saying that not a single devil in all of hell is worse than Macbeth. And so this underscores how bad and how tyrannous Macbeth is. That he's like the worst demon in hell. And that very much contrasts to Act 1, where he was praised for his violence, whereas now his violence is tyrannous and evil. We get this religious imagery, so the hell, the devil, the damnation, all of this presenting Macbeth as a very much evil figure, someone inhuman and aligned with Satan. And audiences would have seen this as confirmation Macbeth has violated God's order and therefore will face divine justice. You get this fricative alliteration, the horrid hell, the double H is there, horrid hell. The devil more damned, so the double H, the double D. And that's fricative because it sounds it, the hell, the damned, the very harsh hitting syllables reinforces Macbeth's demonic and human and inhuman nature by mimicking the brutality of his violence. And then you get this superlative language. He's saying that he's the most evil demon in hell. And so it positions Macbeth as the worst possible embodiment of evil, adding to this hyperbole and exaggeration to reinforce his fall from Act 1. So all of this quote is there to present Macbeth as this evil demon in a very exaggerated way, using metaphors and fricative language and superlatives. So linking to context, as always, our AO3, it links heavy to religion and tragedy. Now, people at the time who were very Christian believed that sometimes if you ask for forgiveness, you could reach salvation. You could be forgiven by God if you ask for forgiveness. However, we know from the last session, Macbeth never once asks for forgiveness. He never seeks salvation. So Macduff's words show that he has gone too far. He's unable to ask for forgiveness because he's done so much that his evil is irredeemable. And so this confirms the peripeteia from Act 3. He's now past the point of being able to come back. And he's a tragic hero destined for eternal damnation. He must fall. He cannot win. He cannot be redeemed. So, Macduff then discovers his family have been murdered. Ross is a character that comes in and he delivers the message that Macbeth has murdered his family. He says, your castle is surprised, your wife and babes savagely slaughtered. So we find out that his family have been murdered. Now Malcolm, in response to this, says to Macduff, dispute it like a man. Let grief convert to anger. Blunt not the heart, enrage it. And I want you to think back. I want you to say in the chat, does anyone recognize this kind of language? Does anyone know what other character used this kind of language? Does anyone remember back? I was familiar with who used this kind of language before in the past. Like dispute it like a man, let grief convert to anger. Yes, it is Lady Macbeth. Uses this kind of language. And Lady Macbeth if we think back to Act 2 and Act 1, tries to manipulate Macbeth by preying on his masculinity. She says, "Are you a man?" And it's weird that Malcolm uses very similar language here. He says, "Dispute it like a man. Let grief convert to anger, blunt not the heart, enrage it." Except there's a big difference here. Because in Act 1, Lady Macbeth, when she says, when you durst do it, then you were a man, screw your courage to the sticking place, both sets of language are rooted in ambition and deception. But the difference here is the intent in which it's said. Lady Macbeth manipulates for selfish gain. She corrupts. It's what she wants. But Malcolm manipulates to restore order. He's trying to encourage he's trying to encourage Macduff to rise up against Macbeth by manipulating him because he knows it's for the good of the country, it's for the good of the world, because he knows it will help him restore order by becoming the rightful king. So by inspiring Macduff to rise up and fight back against Macbeth, he will ultimately restore order and restore himself as rightful king. So the issue isn't the manipulation, it's the intent by which it is done. But it's interesting that it mimics Lady Macbeth's language. But that therefore emphasizes the moral message of the play. Okay, so almost done. Once his family have been killed, once he's been inspired by Malcolm, Macduff seeks vengeance. He says, "Front to front, bring thou this fiend of Scotland and myself within my sword's length set him." And what he means by this is bring me face to face with this devil of Scotland, Macbeth, so that he's within reach of my sword. He is feeling vengeful. And this is important because it again establishes Macduff as Macbeth's rival. This instills hope in the audience because the plot is moving towards its conclusion. It's moving towards its final battle that will ultimately bring the audience to a state of peace and relief. We root for Macduff. In Act 4, Scene 1, we stopped caring about Macbeth because he kills innocent people. Whereas here, our care is going towards Macduff because he's going to kill Macbeth and bring order back to Scotland. So all sympathy has been removed from Macbeth because he's so far past redemption. Before we pitied him because he was guilty, but not anymore. Whereas we now root for Macduff because he brings hope. Now, in this scene, and this is the last thing I want to say, King Edward is introduced as a character. Now, historically, King Edward was the King of England at the time this play was set, which is, in my knowledge, in the 1100s. I can't give an exact date. It's somewhere in the 1100s. So there's a direct reference to King Edward in this. He says, Malcolm says, "Strangely visited people, all swollen and ulcerous, pitiful to the eye, the mere despair of surgery, he cures, hanging a golden stamp about their necks, put on with holy prayers, and 'tis spoken to the succeeding royalty, he leaves the healing benediction." And what he's saying here is that King Edward is able to perform miracles where he can cure people of illnesses just by placing a gold coin around their necks and praying. And he's saying that he's going to be able to pass this gift on to his children. Now, there's a reason that I've mentioned this, because this is really important because Edward represents the ideal godly king, the one that's actually chosen by God. Macbeth was not chosen by God. He took the role of being king by force. He killed Duncan. He killed Banquo. But we know from the great chain of being and the divine right of kings that God is believed at the time that God chose the king. So Edward is this ideal king, the one that was actually chosen by God. He completely opposes Macbeth. When Macbeth spreads disease and bloodshed and suffering, King Edward blesses and restores, a power given by God. So he does what Macbeth cannot do. Macbeth's rule just brings suffering and death and crying and disease, whereas King Edward's rule brings happiness and blessing and peace and calm because he's supposed to be king, whereas Macbeth is not. And so this emphasizes Macbeth's unholy rule, the fact that he's broken the divine right of kings. Um, Macbeth doesn't have this gift. It's a telltale sign that he's not supposed to be king. So Edward's ability to physically heal bodies is a metaphor for the moral and political healing of Scotland, where Macduff overthrows Macbeth. And this is key to the tragic genre because tyranny must be purged before order is restored. So there's one more Macbeth class next week. I'm going to do Act 5 and then I will move on to Inspector Calls. So, very final thing then. Macduff raises an army. He says, Gracious England hath lent us seaward and 10,000 men. Our army is ready. Now, what he means by that is King Edward has lent us his best general, called Siward, and 10,000 soldiers. Our army is ready. So, King Edward of England lends Macduff an army to kill Macbeth and restore order to Scotland. And this is important because tensions begin to rise as we move towards our final battle, where Macbeth's rule is almost over. So we end this scene with tensions rising, tensions building, because as an audience, we're thinking, oh, what's going to happen? Because then now there's an army going to kill Macbeth. Is he going to live? Is he going to die? Well, you have to find out next week in Act 5. So what is the purpose of this scene? Well, it contrasts the kingship. It shows the difference between the person who's meant to be king, Edward and Malcolm, to the person who's taken the throne, Macbeth. We know Macbeth's not meant to be king. I mean, he's literally bringing about suffering and death, whereas Edward heals people. It also presents Scotland's suffering. We saw the orphans crying and the widows howling. People are bleeding under Macbeth. Macbeth's rule brings suffering to everyone in Scotland. He's not meant to be king. These are the consequences of him breaking the great chain. We also see Macduff's motivation. The fact that his family have been murdered gives him motivation to then become Macbeth's rival. And then we also get prepared for the climax. We get this building of tension because the army has been set. Macduff wants to kill Macbeth. And so we don't know if the rebellion is going to be successful or not. Right. That is everything from me today. So is it possible to get a Seaward question in the exam? No, you would not get a Seaward question. And if you did, that would be incredibly harsh. Seaward is a tiny character. You would never get a character-specific question on him. And I'm never going to cover that because it's just not a possibility. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stay around for a few more minutes if you've got any questions. If not, you are free to go. Thank you again for coming. Next week, we'll do Act 5, and then I'm going to completely move on in 2 weeks' time and start an Inspector Calls. So I hope that will be useful to everyone. Okay, someone says, is there a movie for Macbeth? Yeah, there is. There's a 2015 adaptation of this film. I'm not sure if it's on any streaming platforms. That's 15 Macbeth, but it is a really good adaptation. So it's this one here. It says on Amazon Prime, if you have Amazon Prime. If not, yeah, I don't think it's on anything else on any of the streaming platforms. But it's a really good adaptation for those of you who want. Okay, what about the Porter? There's never been a question about the Porter. I've looked at all the past exam questions, and the Porter has never come up. The Porter is in one scene. They would never ask you a character-specific question that is about one scene, because in the exam they're testing your ability to say how things change. So looking at structure, and so to give you the Porter wouldn't give you anything to write about, and so it'd be extremely mean of them to do that. So next week, I'm going to do Act 5. I'm going to finish Macbeth. And then in 2 weeks' time, we're going to move on to An Inspector Calls, the play. So is Macbeth a true story? To some extent, yes. If you were here for my context session, Macbeth is already a story. It's a true story based on real people, but Shakespeare changes the story a little bit. Um, so it's not factual, but it is about real people. And he changes the character slightly because, for example, Macbeth in the original history is actually quite a nice king for a long time before he becomes evil. Whereas in Shakespeare's play, Shakespeare makes him pretty much evil straight away. So that's a change that occurs. And it's all to push a moral message so the audience learns something from watching the play. Cool, right. If there's any more questions, I'll stay for another minute or so. And if there's not, I'll see you next week. Right, okay.